Executive Director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations in Michigan, also Assistant Imam of the Mashhad Wali Muhammad in Detroit, and a member of the North American Imams Federation. So thank you very much for being here. You probably heard what the President said this morning about the planned Quran burning. And I'd certainly like to get your thoughts about it and what you think the reaction will be worldwide, assuming Pastor Jones goes forward with this.
Well, I think that, Pastor Jones does have the right to freedom of speech, as all Americans, but our country was based upon the principles of also religious tolerance and also civility. And I think that as a man of the cloth, I think it's disgraceful that he's totally ignored the teachings of Jesus Christ that do unto others that you would have them do unto you. And he definitely would not like anyone in the Muslim world burning the Quran, or anyone of any, he would not like anyone in the Muslim world burning a Bible, or anyone of any faith burning the Bible, and he shouldn't burn other people's texts. But I think that worldwide, unfortunately, this has stoked up a lot of anti-American sentiment in many Muslim majority countries, and many of the Muslims worldwide have no idea that Pastor Jones is nothing but a fringe pastor with a very small congregation, about 50 people I heard, and he does not represent the majority sentiments of our political leaders, Democrat or Republican, or the vast majority of Christian pastors. So unfortunately, the media coverage of this one fringe man, who's, in my opinion, is a radical, has unfortunately stoked up a lot of anti-American sentiments in the Muslim world.
Do you think the media is somewhat to blame for making such a big deal about this? Obviously, it's a slow news cycle, end of summer, but it's also being used as a wedge issue with an upcoming election. Is the media to blame here, or is that, the media does what the media does and looks for sensational stories?
Well, I think this, in one sense, the media did make Pastor Jones into more than what he really is in terms of his circle of influence, which was really minuscule until the last couple of weeks. However, we do know that in our country in recent weeks there has been a very large vocal anti-Muslim sentiment that has been expressed in our society, not just around the Park 51 mosque project, but in a number of very high-profile incidences of mosque desecrations, protests, the stabbing of a Muslim taxi cab driver in New York, until just less than a week ago, a Sikh man in Seattle was assaulted based upon the premise that he was a Muslim and called Al-Qaeda and a terrorist. So I think that in some ways the media probably did have to cover this, but it should have been covered in terms of a very broad anti-Muslim sentiment that's permeating our society right now.
The Imam was on Larry King's show last night on CNN, interviewed by Soledad O'Brien, and he made a statement that a lot of people are talking about today, especially, well, he made a lot of statements, but the one that seems to be getting a lot of play is that the radicals win if the mosque is moved, and that will inflame the Muslim world and create more, perhaps even violence or killings. You concur with that? Do you think that he might have misstated that, or you agree with that statement?
Well, the fringe element within the Muslim world that are extremists, they're going to be anti-American no matter what. The problem is that we don't want people who would normally be our friends, or people who have some sort of affinity towards our country, to then be turned and made to have anti-American sentiments, which would not only be, we could say, a national security threat, but it also has other negative consequences in regards to people who would want to come here for tourism, business, and I mean there's a number of residual effects.
Would moving the mosque, though, create a negative atmosphere simply if they moved it somewhere else?
Well, I think that it would give victory to many of the people who have tried to frame that the World Trade Center attack was done by, not only done by Muslims, we know there were Muslims involved, but somehow Islam and Muslims in general were somehow complicit in the World Trade Center attack. I think that that would give a victory to the bigots, and I think that there would be some people in the Muslim world who might see that that our country itself is against Islam and the Muslim traditions.
Could you explain to our audience what Americans don't understand about Islam? Because we hear all kinds of quotes, we hear all kinds of perhaps misinformation, mythology about the religion. It's an Abrahamic religion. It's in the Abrahamic tradition, as I understand. We all worship the same God, and yet there are those who will say, well, your religion really isn't like that. Could you help us understand?
Well, the most important belief in Islam is a belief in one God, the God who created the entire universe and Adam and Eve. We do believe that our religion is traced back to Abraham. Jesus Christ is the only person in the Quran who's called the Messiah. We have an entire chapter in the Quran that talks about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and goes into very great detail talking about the Immaculate Conception. And one of the most important ethical teachings of Islam is that no person is truly a believer in God unless he or she loves for his fellow brother and sister in humanity or neighbor what he loves for his own soul. These are some of the primary beliefs and teachings of Islam that I think that many Americans have absolutely no clue about. I know that there's a certain percentage of Americans who believe that Muslims actually worship the moon god, but this is far from the case. We worship the unseen God, the God of Abraham, is who we Muslims give our adoration to and our love.
Why do you think there is such great misunderstanding about Islam in this country?
Well, I think there's two reasons. I think that first, putting the blame upon ourselves as a Muslim community, that prior to 9/11 we were not out in the broader society and being involved as much as in interfaith discussions and trying to explain our faith as we probably could have been. And that led to, when 9/11 happened, that many people falsely conflated the terrorist attacks with American Muslims and Muslims in general throughout the world. But there is also a long narrative, sadly to say, in Western civilization of having tension or being at odds with Islam. For example, if we look at the writings of Dante, we'll see that in one of the lowest circles of hell, that Muhammad the Prophet is listed as one of the lowest circles of hell and seen as being the Antichrist, where in fact we Muslims see Jesus and Muhammad as brothers having the same mission. So there is some tension going back in terms of this narrative in Western civilization and Islam.
I'm looking at we have a live chat stream going on foxnews.com/strategy room, and someone just said, please ask them about the Fort Hood shooter. Whenever there is a crime being committed and someone is Islamic or does it in the name of Islam, certainly it hurts your cause and hurts your religion. How do you react to those incidents where those who are of the Islamic faith have committed those kinds of atrocities?
Well, overseas necessarily, we don't feel responsible for denouncing every single crime or terrorist attack that takes place in the Muslim world. Yeah, exactly. I'm making a point, though. Yeah. Just as Christians would not feel compelled to denounce the Lord's army in Uganda and all the atrocities that they are currently committing right now. But in regards to Nidal Hassan's horrible attack, which I call a fratricide. I actually served in the United States Navy for 4 years. What he did, we came out as an American Muslim community and we strongly condemned what he did basically as an act of fratricide and as an act of treason. It does hurt our cause in terms that anytime there's one wingnut or one person who may not be mentally stable or has some type of grievances commits a crime, that it seems to concretize 7 million American Muslims. So this definitely is a problem. However, we do call for our fellow Americans also, as we condemn these actions, to also look at things justly. And just as, for example, in Austin, Texas, where Joe Stack, who's a white American Christian, committed a terrorist attack and flew that airplane into that building because he had a grievance with the IRS. No one in America equates his faith or his ethnicity with committing that horrible atrocity down in Austin, Texas. So we just ask for justice and that the American public does the same thing when we have a nut such as Nidal Hassan who commits a atrocious act as what he did.
Imam Walid, one more question from our viewership is what do you think of Hamas? Hamas, of course, has been, they have a political arm and they have a terrorist arm. Even the Imam Raouf last night said that he condemns terrorism, and he characterized Hamas as a terrorist organization.
Well, we condemn terrorism no matter if it's committed by an individual, a group, or a state that would commit terrorism. Hamas has clearly been designated as a terrorist organization by our government. We recognize that designation, and we fully tell all American Muslims to obey the laws of the land, which means no American Muslim should be giving any support, in particular material support to Hamas. Now, us not agreeing with Hamas and some of the terrorist attacks they've committed in no way decreases also from our concern and also our condemnation of the Israeli government's illegal occupation of Arab land and also the daily human rights violations that they commit. We have problems with some of the things that Hamas does, as well as we have problems with what the Israeli government is doing as well.
All right, sir, I appreciate your talking to us. What do you predict will happen if, in fact, they go forward with the Quran burning? What would be your prognostication about what might be the pushback or blowback on that?
Well, I mean, all we can do is pray that he doesn't do it. But if he goes forward, you know, we pray that everyone is peaceful and keeps cool heads. And, you know, this man has said that he will consider backing down if the president calls him, or the Secretary of State, or I think he also said the DOD. I don't think that's necessary that our president or Secretary Clinton need to feed into this man's ego. He should do the right things and follow the gospel of Jesus Christ as he claims he's preaching and teaching.
Imam Walid, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you being with us today. Thanks, sir.